Hello, welcome to our arch installation tutorial. First, you'll want to have a quick sip of your coffee because you're going to be here for a while. Just kidding. So you'll see we have set up here our asymmetrical arch structures. So one side sits higher than the other, and they are two separate pieces. We've also already wrapped our chicken wire around the hardware. So the chicken wire is wrapped pretty tightly, but leaving about 10 centimeters of space in between. And we're going to start by building our shape using our greenery. So here you'll see Christine is working on the right side and Lindsay is working on the left side, just to get this simultaneously designed for you for this tutorial. So we're starting with our huck, and we're kind of just building out our shape using the greenery as we see fit. Typically you want that left side to be shorter and angled inward, so you'll want to find greenery pieces in your bunches that follow that flow if possible. And depending on the greenery, sometimes you can actually bend the greenery to make the shape that you need it to make. In terms of our style, we do follow the garden style, free-flowing, kind of unstructured shape. So you'll see that as we're building, we're kind of just, it looks like we're throwing in the greenery at this point, but we are strategically placing it with certain directions for each branch to hit. So typically we'll start with one style of greenery before moving on to anything else. And once you're satisfied with that base, with your first greenery, you can start designing in perhaps a second style of greenery. Here we are using our seeded eucalyptus. So this is going to add texture and fill in some of the spaces that may be apparent from the first load in of greenery. Seeded eucalyptus is really pretty for adding a bit of that texture since there is the seeds on it. It's also a bit of a more olive toned greenery usually, so it provides a color differentiation as well. The only tricky part about working with the seeded eucalyptus is it is quite a flexible style of greenery. It's very flimsy, so you need to strategically place and size the pieces of this eucalyptus. A side note too, while we're watching us fill in the greens, sometimes these arches can be utilized in various spaces for an event or wedding, which is great. The hardware is very lightweight, so they are transportable. Also, sometimes clients like to reuse these pieces over a couple of days or throughout a long day. So it's always good to let them know that they can always maybe pull out the blooms if there's blooms in it once they die, and the greenery will last actually usually quite a few days. So that's always a positive. So here we're just reflecting on the shape of our sides to make sure that they are somewhat unison and flow together with the same thickness and the same free-flowing style of greens on either side. For this arrangement, we're using a third style of greenery. We're going to use some smilax as well. Now this greenery typically comes in on a vine, so you'll have to cut it down into smaller pieces when you're working it in to a structure like this. But it is really delicate and a really pretty type of greenery to use. And it is great to use in large installations because you can get cases of the smilax, which is very helpful when you're ordering your quantities. So you'll see we're using this kind of on the outer edges just to again give it a bit more texture and a third tone of the greenery. So we're just going to continue working in the different styles of greenery as we see fit to finalize our shape. As I mentioned, these are asymmetrical, so they are okay to be different, but also we want them to flow. So you'll note that the main difference in our design is simply the height. You'll also note too the direction that we are placing the greenery in. Sometimes we will face it upward, sometimes we will face it downward, and other times we will place it in horizontally. This will just give different direction for the greenery to flow, again creating more of that garden feel. So there's always the option before adding in any blooms to just have the simple greenery. And that's gorgeous on its own. If you want to have just a greenery asymmetrical arch, you'd pretty much be done here. We're going to start adding in some blooms. So we're starting with some faux stems, which we don't often do, but here these are the faux cherry blossoms. So they're a silk flower in a light pink white tone. And the reason why we're using these here is simply to create lots of body. So this client wanted something a little bit more extravagant and bushy, and these are great stems to use, especially when you may be designing out of season and you can't get fresh cherry blossom branches, especially in such a nice bloom. The faux is a great option to use for something like this. Again, as I mentioned, we don't typically design with faux flowers, but we're just utilizing these ones as part of our base filler. So we're starting at the top and working our way down, balancing each other out on either side, and being sure to create the direction pointing upward towards the flow of our arch. Now we're back to our real flower stems. So we're working in some white limonium as more of our filler. These also serve as a great line flower too, adding a bit more height perhaps in the top. More texture and color, enhancing the greenery as well. So again, we're just filling in from the top downward on either side, keeping that balance, and just creating more of that free-flowing garden feel. In terms of the height here, just for perspective, we've got our higher side on the right standing approximately just over 6 feet tall, and we've got our left side just standing over 5 feet tall. You'll want to ensure too that your bottoms are full. So you may need to go back in and add a bit more greenery and perhaps some filler to cover up the stand at the bottom. Next, we're going to start working in some of our focal flowers. So we're going to use hydrangea in here. Our client wanted some hydrangea. And you'll see that we're putting a water source on the ends of the hydrangea. So we pre-did this with most of our stems, but we just wanted to show you how that little water tube can just pop on the end of the hydrangeas. They are a large flower and do require a constant water source. So if you are working with hydrangea and putting them in a freestanding arch like this that does not have a constant water source, we highly recommend using these water tubes on the ends of these stems to keep them hydrated so that they don't droop. We don't want to use too many of the hydrangea because they are a heavy flower and may make this arch feel heavy, and we want it to still remain a little bit more floaty. So we're kind of just working in a few, again, top to bottom, making sure it looks balanced, and it's already looking quite full with that addition. Now we're ready to start adding some more focal flowers. Here we're using commercial mums in a very neutral, warm color. These mums are also a bit of a bigger bloom, so they take up a lot of space. But in contrast to the shape of the hydrangea, they're more flat. And we're also going to use some roses in that same neutral warm tone. These are toffee roses. And we're going to reflex some of the petals to make them a bit larger looking, more extravagant. So you just peel each petal back and flip it inside out. And it gives the rose a very open, pretty look. Also, if this event is going to be going on for quite some time, it's never a bad idea to add a water source on the end of these stems as well. Roses are typically very hardy, especially if you have prepared them with a hydration solution. They typically will last for an entire day, but if you want to be safe, we recommend using the water tubes on the end of each stem for these two. This is especially important if your event is in warm weather. The flowers typically don't hold up as well out of water in hot temperatures, of course. So again, please be sure to use a water source if you feel necessary and would like to provide longevity for these flowers as well. So you'll see we are reflexing some of these roses, not all of them, again creating that variation. And we're adding the roses in at different heights. Some are being pushed into the wire further and others are being held out. This helps to flow in the shape and not make anything look too tight or compact. We've also got the pale pink roses that we're going to work into. We'll see how pretty that looks when we reflex it. Also make sure that there are no brown stems or petals. All of the guard petals have been removed and nothing has been damaged in transport if you have transported these and are setting this up right on site, which we also recommend doing to avoid any damage to the stems. Like I mentioned, this particular structure is easy to transport if you have a large enough vehicle. Weight-wise, it's very easy to lift. However, flowers are delicate, and especially when you're designing it and placing them in particular ways, it's easy for them to snap or break or get damaged in transport. So if you can, we recommend doing the setup on site. If you don't have the time before an event to do the setup on site, an option too that we often do is to do the base. So just the greenery and maybe some filler at your studio before heading to the venue. That will just save you a bit of time too. Finally, we're going to add in a few more of our filler stems to create some more shape and just fill in a few of the gaps. So you'll see we're using some spray roses and some yarrow. And we're also going to add in a few butterfly ranunculus to create some movement on the outer edges. That's the yarrow that we're adding in there now. And these are our butterfly ranunculus. We're going to remove that extra greenery just to make sure that the stems look more dainty. We've got the darker tone of the yarrow as well. And then we're adding in a few of our standard ranunculus as well, just to create some more dancers, some nice delicate stems on the outer edges. And as we're finishing up here, I just thought I'd mention if you're interested in learning more about this recipe, including our stem counts and color names for each of the colors and flowers that we use here, feel free to check out our recipe section where we're including all of our favorite recipes. And we're going to include these for various items that you'll be seeing throughout our course too. Our recipes are a great resource if you're just starting out or are really interested in the color palettes that we've used to demonstrate here. So please consider checking those out. Here we're just doing our final look to make sure that the colors are all flowing. We're trimming a few stems where maybe they need trimming. Sometimes if the long stems are sticking out of the back, you want to cut them down. But overall, this is looking pretty good and quite full. And there you have it. You can just shift them slightly to put them into position where they need to stand. Making sure that the angle's sitting okay. We could be here all day adjusting. Just adding a bit more color in the bottom if it doesn't look balanced. Doing a quick sweep to get all of the stems and the leaves out of the way. And there she is. Thanks for watching.